Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's web seminar. My name is Mike Perkowski. I'm pleased to be the moderator for today's program. I want to thank you all for joining us by taking some time out of your busy day to learn more about our topic, which is entitled Beyond Efficiency, the Regulatory Impetus for Digitally Transforming Your Contracts. Before we go any further, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the sponsors for today's program, DocuSign and Cimplifi. We appreciate their support. Today, we're fortunate to have three great speakers who are going to share a lot of information with you, are going to engage in a very interactive conversation about the key topics, and who will be on hand to answer your questions in the Q&A part of our program at the end of the presentation today. Our presenters are Patrick Meyer, who is the Director of Financial Services Solution Consulting at DocuSign, a team that works with a full spectrum of customers from SMBs to enterprise and across banking, wealth management, and insurance industries. Patrick is also the Executive Director of Weatherhelm Capital Management LLC, an investment advisory firm. And with those concurrent roles, and more than 20 years experience in the industry, Patrick is on the cutting edge of fintech, while simultaneously using his experience as an active practitioner in the world of financial services to explore how the DocuSign platform can help the industry beyond e-signature. We're also pleased to have Charles Post, Executive Vice President at Cimplifi, where he leads next generation contract analytics and lifecycle management business. For more than a decade, Charles has been a legal tech authority on utilizing emerging technologies such as AI and machine learning to tackle the legal and financial industry's most complex contract data issues. His unique experience is anchored in advising businesses on practically implementing contract analytics and contract lifecycle management projects, and standing up digital capabilities, including other technologies, including blockchain and smart contracts. Third, we're very happy to have Genevieve Dong. Genevieve is Associate General Counsel, Executive Director in Wells Fargo's legal department, focusing on regulatory and legal inventory build issue activities, as well as support of enterprise risk programs. She previously was Head of Product Solutions from Customer Client Contract Generation and Enablement in the Information Management Utility of the Chief Operating Officer at Wells Fargo, where she led a team of attorneys focused on leveraging AI, machine learning, and contract lifecycle management legal technologies for enterprise programs such as LIBOR and QFC record keeping. And just as a reminder, Genevieve is speaking in her personal capacity, and any thoughts or opinions expressed during the presentation are her own and not representative of her employer or Wells Fargo. So that's great. We've got, as I said, three great speakers. Before we get started with the real meat of the content, I do want to turn it over to Patrick Meyer to get us started with the safe harbor.
Thanks, Mike. Quick housekeeping note that this presentation may contain forward-looking statements, and that any purchase decisions should be made based upon information in the market today. Okay, we can get started. The snowball effect, or the snowball of regulation, continues to gather mass with each new year, all while the cost of compliance continues to balloon. Unfortunately, throwing bodies at the issue might not be the best path forward, not just because of adding additional headcount at a time when we generally see the industry cutting headcount, but also because it might take more than a human to comply in an effective and an efficient manner. Since Dodd-Frank in 2008, there's been a 60% increase in compliance spend. That was the root argument that sprawled the rollbacks in 2018. But in reality, these costs have not receded and have reached almost $270 billion annually and have become roughly 10% of a bank's operating cost. Banks are spending about $200 or $623 billion to address compliance. A contributing factor is this, that they continually build up new infrastructure each time a new regulation comes down, only to break it all down and dismantle right after that. With fines exceeding $7 billion in 2022, the industry needs to take a look at something that's a little bit more durable, permanent, and future-proof as a way to address regulations coming forward. There's a lot of components that ladder into your compliance regime. The part that we want to discuss specifically today is around contract management. When a new regulation hits, knowing what's in your contracts is critical to understanding the scope or impact of the regulation. New regulations are a splash of cold water that reminds us that contracts trump best practices. We often settle into workflows that are a web of best practices versus processes that adhere to a perfectly aligned regulation. So when a new regulation comes online or existing ones are revisited, it's important to have a line in sight into your actual contractual obligations. We've also additionally observed that each regulation doesn't live in its own silo, and it often impacts a repository of contracts that might have just been impacted by another regulation. This whack-a-mole nature of this environment demands you have an efficient process to analyze your contracts. Charles, you have a tremendous amount of experience in this arena. What's your point of view on all of this?
Thank you, Patrick. Hello, everybody, and thank you to the American Banking Association for having us here today. Few things just want to kind of level set on. First is organizations are going through, when new regulation comes out and people are analyzing how it's impacted to their organization, their financial institution, it's a bit of Groundhog's Day. And what I mean by that is that organizations continue to do the same, as Patrick mentioned, it's throwing bodies at it, having the people problem. And the goal of that exercise is to make that box of regulation as small as possible, because generally speaking, it's not part of a revenue generating activity, which everyone understands. However, it's the cost of business. And so the way that we have been thinking about things and the way we collectively approach things here is, how do we break that cycle, get out of that Groundhog's Day? How do we move on? How do we avoid having to search for the consultant's spreadsheet of the changes and who they reached out to when they're no longer here at the organization? How do we move past that? And the way to move past it is thinking about it more strategically. And what we're going to talk to you today about is how using regulation, and regulation, as you all know, have dates. They have compliance periods, they have grace periods, they have amnesty periods, they have times for comment. But the reality is that there's lots of runway to be able to map out leveraging regulation and other market events that are coming down the pipeline, to be able to build that bigger vision and pivot and pivot directionally these different regulatory programs towards that big vision. And what we're going to do today, and obviously we're going to speak to Genevieve a little bit later, and that's going to be, she was living and breathing that, she's living and breathing that now. But it's how do we leverage regulation for digital transformation? They're not mutually exclusive. They can live together, they work together. And the reality is that these are two things that changing people's mindset and organizations' mindset around this is really key to success in the organization. So those are my 2 cents, Patrick, on that one.
Perfect. Yeah, I think, to sum it up, there's going to be a lot of modifications to contracts and whatnot. So the more and more these contracts are modified, the more important it is to have, like Charles says, a scalable way to intelligently manage and track a lot of what's going on. I think, to me, there's probably 4 pillars that are necessary to building a foundational contract management platform that can help support this regulatory environment. So the first thing that you need to do is centralize all of your contracts. Ideally, you'd also be bulk ingesting a lot of the legacy contracts that are out there already. Next, you would need a platform to identify, key terms and language. On that, you should also, get to the point where you're prioritizing reviews and, potential remediation out there. And then lastly, you should be prepared to, report on the traceability of the changes, that come as a result of all the changes that you're going to be making to the contracts from all these regulations. So I think to arrange this into a bit of a more prescriptive element and align to, the core tenets of our contract management technology, first to mention, there's a clear need going forward for a centralized inventory of all contracts. I would say that this used to be a nice to have and is turning more into a must have. Piggybacking on that centralized repository contracts, there's going to be the need to mass search all of these agreements in response to both local and global events, to assure that all of the SLAs within them are being met amongst all the other contractual obligations that are in there. Continuing on that theme of centralization, there's also a need going forward to be able to systematically manage and update templates and remediate contracts. This is becoming important with each event that we see play out in the market. I know that a lot of the current state is that people will assemble committees maybe once a year, twice a year to update templates. I think at the velocity that we're seeing things come to market, that likely won't work given the need for speed that we're experiencing. And then lastly, due to the growing importance of having a data continuum, We won't be able to rely on mass data entry products. The ability to auto extract and route key data points. It's going to be a favorable approach as opposed to like human errors that would expedite reporting deliverables. So Charles and I have touched a little bit on the theory of a lot of this, and so what we wanted to do was actually shift a little bit and bring Genevieve and cut her into the conversation and have her provide a little bit of practical experience. So Charles, you and Genevieve have a great working relationship, so I'll actually let you take it from here.
Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate it. So welcome, Genevieve. Really appreciate it. I'm really excited to have you here as part of this webinar and the seminar. And what I thought would be great is for the audience to really hear about you and your journey because you've lived it. And it sounds nice and neat and tidy on paper when you're going through and mapping out the data points, building that contract, data dictionaries, mobilizing that inventory search of where everything is and how many different places they live. And how, and when and you've been able to distill the level of overwhelmingness people get when they feel like they're boiling the ocean with these types of programs, because you've helped focus and prioritize based upon numbers of factors. But it would be great if you could kind of just start with like a bit about you and your journey for folks, and just give us some color on that.
Thanks, Charles and Patrick, and thank you to American Banker and DocuSign and Cimplifi for having me today. Happy to discuss my journey. It definitely was not an easy one, but definitely a lot of lessons learned. I originally came to Wells Fargo from a contract analytics company. And so I worked on the vendor side. So I had sort of a unique perspective in understanding what customers' pain points were, where they wanted to go, but how they were going to get there. So when I first came to Wells Fargo, for the first few months, I worked with the corporate and investment banking line of business to basically use some technology that they had acquired to support some business initiatives and regulatory compliance. And what I found was that it was really important for the business and the customer to be enabled in using this technology. So I came to essentially find some great use cases that they could focus on and really try to educate and socialize awareness about how this technology can be incorporated into their business. And so soon after that, I was asked to head a team to build AI models using the contract analytics software, which eventually became DocuSign Insight. And when I say AI models, I mean a model is a business rule or string of logic that we build to search and extract relevant provisions based on sample language. And so what we needed to do for this team was support the LIBOR transition at Wells Fargo. And so what Wells Fargo wanted to do was really leverage the technology that was available out there. And AI at that time, back in 2019, 2020, was still fairly new, but being the trailblazers Wells Fargo is in technology, we were able to utilize that technology to support that process. And eventually, once we had completed that LIBOR transition project successfully, we were able to branch out throughout the enterprise to support all lines of businesses in helping them bridge sort of the legal aspects as well as technology and create efficiencies for extremely manual processes that the bank had originally, not just the bank, but any company had tried to initially attack most of these regulations that were coming down. So I, for the last 4 years, been working with a great team of solutions architects who were formerly attorneys, finding use cases, leveraging the technology that we had in-house, and also just trying to find other places in the bank that we could leverage the technology that we had. So.
Thanks, Genevieve. I really appreciate that insight, and hearing about your journey. One of the other, so the way that we've been thinking about it is that you have these two different buckets. You have like business as usual and regulation, and regulatory reporting, for example, where you're finding information in contracts to put for like QFC record keeping, for example, and moving that information based upon the requirements of QFC record keeping, as Wells Fargo's interpreted it. Versus, hey, we have to set up this new client who just came in with the same agreement, but it's the same agreement, two different data sources. How is this done what's the old quote unquote way that you've noticed or observed that the street does things, and as well as with yourself, but also how have you changed that mentality? Like what are the challenges with that, and how have you pivoted away from that?
Yeah, so as with a lot of regulatory requirements, most companies are reactive in their approach. These regulations are coming down and you need to react quickly. So there isn't much time to set up a strategic initiative. So it was important that, we address the issue at hand with a tactical solution, but then also keeping in mind a more strategic, larger vision that you want to eventually implement. So while it's okay to have that tactical solution to address, immediate regulatory requirements, it's also important to keep in mind how you're going to do this. How is this going to be sustainable? And how are you going to be reactive to another regulation coming down? And we saw this with LIBOR. It was, something that came down, we had to address it. But in implementing this technology at Wells Fargo, we are now able to pivot, and if another regulation comes down, we're better prepared because we've set up the infrastructure to address these immediate regulatory requirements that come down. So what I've noticed with QFCs and is that we were needing to extract information from the contracts, and that was fine as a tactical solution to address that requirement. But how we were going to address that in the future was that we were implementing contract lifecycle management and document generation technology with AI, so that we can make sure that we pull those terms out that we need pre-execution and during the document generation process. And that is a more sustainable approach than doing something that is more reactive. And so that was an example of how we were able to sort of build the foundation to be able to pivot when different market events arise.
That's great. Would you, hearing about this, it sounds like you started with contract analytics and then you pivoted towards more of that, for everyone post-execution, right? That legacy book for regulatory purposes in terms of a discovery stage. And then you moving towards, hey, how do we make our contracts better? How do we include these components? And then going forward, how do we send out notifications through a CLM system? Just tell me, what was the first kind of regulation that you started on with this journey? Was it LIBOR? Was it like SR 14, the regulatory guidance? Was it something else? And then who were the parties involved in your organization? Like, who did you have to bring to the table, or who were brought to the table with you to really get this, to really think about things differently? And the reason I'm asking that is, generally speaking, as we all know, and the audience knows, is there's always these discussions of sometimes it's buy versus build. Sometimes it's neither. It's people, then buy versus build, and then, okay, now that we're buying, what does that look like? So if you could just kind of share that, again, to the extent you can, like that insight into where you started, who was there, and like just that decision, like what was the thought process around the decision-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be honest, when we were first started, we weren't entirely sure who needed a seat at the table. And throughout the process and throughout, building out these use cases, it was really important that we had, key stakeholders at the table. And that is not just the folks in the business, the line of business that are going to eventually be using the technology, but having legal opine, and so having legal at the table, as well as compliance and control and risk partners, and technology. And so it was important that we had everybody at the table before, starting and embarking on this journey, and anywhere this technology was going to touch, because the last thing you want is to implement and roll out this technology and find someone that had not been involved from the beginning, potentially being a blocker to you moving forward. So that was definitely something that we needed to have to get started. What was also important, that was a lesson learned from an earlier use case, pre-LIBOR, that we were working on, was that we needed an enabled team. So we needed to be enabled in the actual software that we were using. And, most companies don't have an in-house, professional services team that is going to be able to build these models and create the process that you need to implement this technology. So what we ended up doing was, we did have a team we were building in-house, but we aligned ourselves with trusted partners such as Cimplifi and DocuSign to help us really understand how best to implement the software and train us, so that they were teaching us how to fish instead of fishing for us. And that was a much more sustainable approach, allowed us to be able to take on more use cases and gain that trust from our line of business partners when we were, basically offering the solution to them for their current process and understanding, what their target state process was. So it was definitely making sure that you align yourselves with the experts. We weren't trying to come in and use a tool that we didn't understand. So we aligned ourselves with those professionals and experts in the field that have done a number of these use cases at other institutions and have been able to scale. So that was really important to us, to make sure that we had that and eventually have a good team internally to be able to move that needle and progress with the digital transformation that we had at
No,
the
that's firm. It's very interesting in terms of hearing about your, it was just for everybody being able to do it yourself versus having someone do it for you is a pretty key thing that we focus on, that obviously Genevieve knows from experience. Why? Because you don't want to be calling up a vendor in the middle of the night on a holiday weekend, ask them to do something when no one's available. And that's usually, again, either executives or regulators or internal, external, there's some type of inquiry, and you want everything to be within your control, generally speaking. And that's one of the reasons, outside of building that IP internally and building up the internal knowledge, being able to enable it yourself is pretty critical in terms of, looking at different tools as part of your larger process. And would you say, Genevieve, again, this isn't something a little bit different, but, in terms of, obviously ROI comes up as discussions a lot. And generally speaking, these types of projects would go to outside counsel or to, let's say, some kind of, consulting review. Would you say that this is more of a cost-effective approach in your experience than what would be the alternatives of these external exercises and repeating them over and over again for the different regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the amount of time you save and money you save. Having the team in-house, having the technology in-house allows you to not only be able to ramp up a project very quickly, you don't have to worry about onboarding the vendor and then, and making sure that they get set up. And then as soon as the project's over, you offboard them. And then if another project pops up, then you have to onboard all over again, go through negotiations for, an SOW. And just having a team in-house really just helps us be able to pivot when new regulations or new market events occur. Allows us to internally have these discussions with more lines of businesses, effectively, making sure that the entire enterprise has has these tools at their disposal, and they can easily just call the internal team and ask them to show a demo or meet other other stakeholders, other partners that may be interested. It allowed us to be able to socialize this program and the benefits involved by hearing it from people that are internal to the firm, rather than from an external vendor or external counsel that may have other alternatives or other ideas about why they want to sell you this project. But having someone, having the team central at Wells Fargo was very key to our success for future initiatives.
So let me, so thank you for that. I think that's excellent, in terms of how hearing about just the kind of some of the kind of high level, cost effective, cost benefit kind of thought process there. The other thing I wanted to ask, again, a little bit slightly different here, but when you were working with a line of business, for example, on a regulation, would they like kind of repeat clients internally of yours where they came back with a new use case of something different that's not necessarily against the same regulation? It's something new, something around business as usual. Could you talk a little bit about that? Just because I think it's really important for the audience to hear about, hey, listen, we're using this for digital transformation. We're using this regulation, but like the digital transformation aspect of it has a big tail. And that tail helps the business in their day-to-day activities beyond just complying with the rules. So if you could share, again, you don't have to go into specific use cases, but hearing some of that, because I think that's where the ROI, and we're going to get into the metrics in a moment, but that's where you start to really, the rubber hits the road in terms of ROI outside of a single project. Yeah,
I mean, we absolutely had people coming to us, while we were midstream in the project, saying that, hey, this sounds a lot like another regulation that we have to address. Can you help us out? So word travels fast within the firm. So it's definitely much easier to be able to make other lines of businesses, other business partners aware of the work that you're doing. We also did a lot of open house demos where, each month we would showcase the different use cases that we had. And again, this is all internal to our firm. So, we're able to share the details, versus having, an outside vendor come in and show us a generic use case that doesn't really apply to the work that we're doing here. And so we would have these open house demos where we would show the work that we were doing, the different solutions that we've implemented, the attributes that we were pulling and data points, and how we were able to connect to various systems that other lines of businesses that also use and leverage. And so and that's where we also were able to share benefits and cost savings. And so that really resonated across the enterprise, with other lines of businesses lining up and saying, can we use it too? And having it centralized in the information management utility and the chief operating office really allowed us to use and leverage this technology for the entire company, versus if it was sitting with a particular line of business and supporting only that line of business. So having that more federated model was important.
That's all great. And you actually brought me to a point that I wanted to make before, but this is more of a natural segue to do. Lots of organizations are always figuring out who owns this, where does this live, how do you do things? And there's sometimes legal owns it, but does legal have the budget to be doing things on the enterprise level? Or is it operations who work and have an enterprise budget to support the enterprise in similar, more manual activities that they're now automating? And for y'all, it sounded like y'all, this kind of your center of excellence and your the kind of folks that you built in terms of your internal consulting firm, as you put it, they are sitting in operations, right? Or they were in operations at that point in time during the project and probably slightly afterwards, correct?
Yeah. I think that when I came to Wells Fargo, we had the software sitting in one of the lines of businesses in corporate and investment banking, because they were using it specifically for a number of initiatives. And while they are one of our, key business partners, it wouldn't allow us to really scale across the enterprise. So I think having it, to support the LIBOR initiative, that the LIBOR transition that affected a number of lines of businesses, having it in operations and in the operating office was key in making sure that we can really penetrate the market and make sure that everybody had access to all those tools that we had.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I know that always comes up, especially with folks that are learning more about this or trying to understand what others are doing around how they're setting this up, because obviously this implies budget and costs and things. How did you measure success? What was like the metrics you were doing in terms of different personas? Obviously, there's executive personas, there's project personas, there's individual management personas, and they want different types of metrics, reporting, KPIs. Tell us a little bit about your thought process or what you were doing around this and some of the things that you think really worked and what didn't.
Yeah, I think it was always really important to show, the time saves, the cost efficiencies, how much this would cost, this project would cost if we were to outsource it to, a company that was going to just extract terms manually, the cost per contract in that sense to review versus what we did internally. So we did have to, measure those benefits. But it took some work, but being able to show how much time we saved, and the repeatable nature of the solution. So yes, it may cost just a few dollars less to review a contract using our contract analytics technology, but then you have to factor in again onboarding and moving the contracts outside of the bank. And so there's a lot of, risk there. And so having it, a tool in-house where we don't have to shuffle around contracts and move, our repository has our contracts. We can point the AI technology to it, to this particular location that has our contracts. All within, our behind our firewall, and that there's a lot of cost saves there, and definitely risk avoidance, so it was definitely something that we needed to start capturing the metrics early, so that we were able to socialize that and get buy-in from senior leadership, from other business partners, and then also finding those champions that are that understand the saves here, and will help you kind of spread that message to other lines of businesses.
So it sounds like it was both a quantitative and qualitative approach, but it's not. But in terms of your response here, it sounds like you touched upon the different types of return on investment, right? Time to revenue, cost avoidance, cost savings, and obviously risk mitigation, which is a bit fuzzier, but you know it when you see it, or someone in the right role sees it, and probably you right now in your new role. But in terms of understanding where you are today versus where your organization was, what kind of advice would you have for peers in the street who are working on, not literally, I mean on like Wall Street and different banks? What's your opinion for them or advice to them in terms of, let's say they're trying to understand whether they should move toward, how do we leverage regulation toward, where do you start? Who do you go to? What are the things to be thinking about? I think that'd be super helpful.
I think we touched on, making sure you have the right people around the table, the right team set up. So, there's a lot of coordination with legal, with technology, with the business, wherever, whoever's owning this particular technology, but making sure that, everyone has a seat at the table, can be heard. But I think for a long-term strategy in implementing and getting started, I think I would focus on three things. One is due diligence, like make sure you do your homework, find, understand the product, understand its strengths and weaknesses, because every piece of technology has a strength and a weakness. So understand what those are and where they fit in your organization. And then, finding the right use cases like that. So that's all part of doing your homework and understanding, where are you going to start? Because if you choose the wrong use case, if you choose something that is too complex, where you're trying to boil the ocean, you're going to probably not succeed, but worse, you're going to lose the trust of senior leadership, of people who are waiting to see what's going to happen. And as soon as you lose that trust, then you're going to be spending the rest of your time trying to prove to them, yes, this technology works. We just didn't pick the right use case, but it works for all these other use cases. You want to try to avoid that. So make sure you do your homework and your due diligence. Also, once you get liftoff and you get those quick wins and you're showing that there is benefit, you want to socialize it. You need to soundboard it. You need to make sure you find your champions so they can come out and tell everyone all the great work that you're doing. So that's really important. And 3, don't be quick to offer a solution until you're sure it's going to work. And that kind of leads to the, finding the low-hanging fruit and the quick wins that I mentioned earlier. Really understand, the solution and where you're, how you're going to present it. Because, again, it's all about trust and showing that, the technology that you have does work and knowing where that works in your organization. So those are just a few things that I have noticed in my experience that will really get you to be able to get buy-in for your solution.
No, I think it's excellent advice. And I think if people were to adhere to it or follow some portions of it, I think it would take them a long way in terms of being able to start everything on the right foot. Right, like you said, the right use case. If you're starting with a voluminous securitization use case, or you're starting with an NDA use case, those are kind of two extremes of the same coin. But starting with even LIBOR is fairly ambitious in terms of the types of concepts within the loans. But starting small and thinking big is a very important lesson that people need to take away. Start with the right use case that is something that has a level of complexity, as you mentioned, can be measured, right people at the table, and also you're able to have a quick win. It's not like a 5-year program. Like having something done in a few months or weeks versus years takes a long time. And also that can be, the one thing that you kind of inferred in there, but I wanted to say out loud is it has to be able to work on multiple use cases, multiple agreement types, different business lines, different things. It can't just be a pointed solution for, futures agreements. Like it's got to be really agreement agnostic. It sounds like you're alluding to throughout. So that's super helpful. In terms of, what do you predict is going? I know there's a lot of change in the market, especially around AI. And you were in AI before really AI was the, on every other channel. Or every other streaming show that they have. But in terms of like, what do you predict for 2024? What do you think is going to change going into next year? Is it going to be in terms of regulation and also technology? What do you think about that? What's your prediction?
Yeah, so I think AI is a hot topic. It's a hot topic, everywhere outside the bank. It's a hot topic inside the bank, and I think everyone is ready and interested to incorporate AI into their business. So I think what I'm going to see is that a lot of companies trying to implement a solution very quickly without doing their due diligence, without really understanding how that's going to fit into their organization. And also not doing their research on which AI and which technology to choose. Not all AI is built the same way. Everyone says they have AI. Is it generative AI? Is it, there's just so many different kinds. And so I think that, some AI is ripe for scaling in large businesses, and some are more, successful in niche areas. So I think it's important to that the companies really do their due diligence and understand. And if you're not sure, align yourself with a partner, with an expert, such as Cimplifi, or, to help you kind of understand what are your needs, what are your pain points, and what sort of solution will work best for what you're trying to accomplish. So, and then I do recommend that companies do crawl, walk, and then run. Start small, then you can start tackling more complex and large scale use cases. But, starting with LIBOR wasn't really a choice. It was something we needed to do, but luckily we were successful. And then after that, we sort of pulled back and did, a lot of small use cases for different lines of businesses to be able to show the value of what we had just stood up. And so you just want to make sure that you build that trust slowly. And once you do, then people will come knocking at the door and say, hey, I heard you did this great project for this line of business. I have something similar. Can you do something like that for me? And then it's just at that point, prioritization and understanding, which use cases you're going to attack first.
Sounds like you have a very different problem than convincing people at the beginning of this journey than and figuring out who's next in line in your queue that's going out the door and around the block. So it's a good problem to have, frankly, but it sounds like it's something that spreads like wildfire to a degree.
You do it the right way.
Right, exactly. One of the other things that I wanted just to mention is, would you say that, and this is how we feel, is that you have lots of departmental kind of single trick tools pretending to be enterprise when they're not. And that's one of the things that, I know you look for is like, is it really enterprise grade, or is it really just something that's trying to pretend to be? Would you say that's something that you would advise our audience here to kind of watch out for when they're in the market looking at different tools?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important because a lot, and this goes back to my time working as a vendor and understanding, what is ready, what's not ready, what's on the roadmap. I think that it's important when you're vetting tools to have the professionals, the experts, people who deal with, understanding the market and understanding which tools are advancing, are scalable, are enterprise, having them, have a seat at the table and advising, because, I'm the last thing I want to do is come in and say, I'm an AI expert. I know about all AI and I know which tool to choose because I know better. I know that there's people out there that is their job to look at these tools and give recommendations. So I think that it's important to really do your due diligence, do your homework. If that means engaging with a business partner, an expert that knows this industry really well, then you can, be better prepared to select the right AI tool, the right piece of technology for your business. If your business focuses solely on one area, maybe there is a tool that it, will directly, create success and wins for your particular process. But if you're looking for something large scale, scalable, and agnostic to all different kinds of products and contract types and agreement types, then, you need to start really understanding, who the key players are. And so we look at, the Gartner Magic Quadrant for who are, those who are the leaders in the pack and people who are, are companies that are, great in niche areas, but not necessarily scalable. So I think it is definitely really important, because if you being at a large company, large institution, it takes a long time to sunrise a solution. And then to sunset that and sunrise another one, it's not as easy. So you want to make the right decision right off the bat.
Right, and obviously kind of through your journey, obviously DocuSign was that platform of choice, but it's also, we also have to manage everyone's expectations. These platforms aren't perfect. They're not the silver bullet. They're not that. And hearing your journey and also hearing what you built and set up in terms of it, really infrastructure around Center of Excellence, building an institutional knowledge, building career paths for individuals, building on this. It really sounds like you have to have a plan and a tool to build to collectively a solution. And that solution is an enterprise grade solution. So I just wanted to, make sure we touch upon that. I'll hand it back to Patrick for kind of the next segment, which is, I think, the Q&A before we finish up here. But thank you so much, Genevieve. Yeah. I thought your insight was super, super helpful and super engaging. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel as though I earned my JD on that observation and probably by my MBA in change management too. So appreciate that. But I've seen a couple questions start to funnel in. So I think we can start to go through some of those. I think the first, and this might be towards Genevieve, but the question was, what are the regulations that keep you up at night?
All of them.
Different questions.
No, I mean, I think that a lot have been coming through. In my position now, I am building an inventory of sustainable laws, rules, and regulations that affect Wells Fargo. So really, every single one of them in all the jurisdictions as well as international are important to us. So all of it keeps me up at night. But I don't see them as real issues more than I see them as opportunities, right? Opportunities for us to digitally transform our organization and make sure that, when these regulations come through, we are already addressing them and we are not reactive. So, I see them as opportunities, and so I wouldn't say they keep me up at night, but definitely anything coming through that would affect financial institutions are definitely top of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. Market participants are always worried about all regulations, right? Next question that I see is, can you elaborate on the contractual implications of the T+1 change? Charles, do you want me to take a crack at it and then you can backfill me?
Sure. I also wanted to add to the what are the regulations that keep you up at night? Because it's not always the new regulations. It's also what we've already implemented, where they're very manual and you can hear them clicking away in Excel. But definitely, why don't you give a stab at T+1, then I'll shoot some few thoughts.
Yeah, actually, Charles just took me down to a conference most recently where this topic came up, this T+1. And, I sort of addressed it when I was talking earlier about how contractual obligations trump best practices. So I think, there's a lot of people that have best practices with their counterparties of when certain things are delivered, on settlement date. And when something like this comes up where we're going to change, from T+2 to T+1, it's a reminder to go in and look at that contract and see when you're actually due to deliver certain deliverables, because in your head, it might be different than what it is in a contract. And, to extend on that, then, it's not always the same location in these contracts where you're going to find the actual, contractual obligations. It might be in a clause, might be in a table, it might be in an exhibit. So it's not necessarily a quick sweep where you can look through and see where all of these clauses exist. How'd I do, Charles?
No, that's as usual, Patrick. Excellent. All I would say is that, for the securities finance business as it's impacted by T+1, which is our focus area at that Risk Management Association conference, understanding, I think there's a bit of, one of the things about these regulations is that people are very worried about reopening agreements for negotiation. Of course, it's a practical commercial consideration. However, putting your head in the sand, so to speak, and ignoring what's in them because of that point is not the right thing to be doing. Generally speaking, understanding what's in them and then what's the approach if you want to change things in terms of, for example, if you have T+1, but your contract allows for a cure period that would put you, in some regulatory risk, why would you keep that in the agreement? And also, it's not just the agreements. Sometimes it's the desk procedures that also help, clarify kind of the business relationship, especially around trading, because obviously trading is so dynamic and these agreements are so data rich in what they have to go into systems, that it's really important that when these regulations come out or these market events change, to really understand what's in them in order to make the best data-driven decisions. Making decisions based upon one template, assuming that all are similar, or making decisions based upon the idea that it's worse to reopen the agreements versus complying, really doing your due diligence around the regulation is not necessarily the approach we would advise on. So I definitely think that. And just to the other point earlier around regulations that keep you up at night, third-party risk management, June 6th, the joint guidance by the FDIC, the Fed, and the OCC on how to on third-party risk. That keeps me up at night. Why? Again, not at a bank, but the reality is that these organizations being able to do that gap analysis and seeing where you sit initially is probably the hardest step in socializing this. And we think that market participants may be about a step and a half behind that. And regulators are going to be really, in our opinion, are really going to be focusing on this going into this year, into next year as well, because it's third-party risk. And obviously the scope of that regulation has changed as well. And happy to talk more about it later, but just wanted to make sure we address that. So thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, and I think we had a separate webinar a little bit back that went through that in detail. So we can also check that out too, if you haven't seen that. Other question here is, what other systems? We have other systems that help us look into portfolio risk. Is this different or complementary? I mean, I would take it as complementary.
Of course.
I think like as Genevieve mentioned, there's a bunch of different lines of business that you're going to tie into. So there's a larger roll up when you're defining risk. It's not just the contract. There's a separate actual balance sheet or something that has risk to it as well. And so all of that funnels up into something that's a larger model and infrastructure. So with that, I would categorize it as complementary for sure.
Yeah, Genevieve, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is also a consideration when selecting the right tool, is understanding where the data is going to live, and if you're going to have it, go from one platform to another. I know that DocuSign has a lot of availability in terms of what different platforms they connect to. And that was also one of the reasons why we selected DocuSign for a number of our use cases for using for contract analytics as well as contract lifecycle management. We had other tools that were slated to be implemented at the bank. So it was important that we understood the compatibility between those tools and how they were going to work together. So I think that it's almost always complementary unless it's another contract lifecycle management tool. And in that sense, you might not need both. But most of the time, I think, if that goes to understanding what the tools do and how they work together, because a lot of times, someone will come to us and say, hey, we already have a contract generation tool. It's Jira, and Jira is not really a contract generation tool, but they were using it for that. So making sure you understand how the tools will work together. If you're using them, as they were meant to be used, then that is also a consideration. So.
Well said. The only thing I would add to that is you're not telling the full story by just having the risk data and not the contract data. It helps you prioritize, it helps you focus. Having the two data sets married together really helps, creates a new, richer data set, frankly. And understanding where looking at the portfolio, is it from a single client, and how do we define client? What does that really mean? Always look at client reference data. So this is a missing gap, or not a gap, or not a well-manufactured set of data in the street today overall, and being able to really perfect the industrial assembly process of this data and marrying it to the risk data so that people have pictures, we think is not even just complementary, we think it's necessary. At least that's my view on it. And a little bit just on the other side is that without that view of what's in the agreements, you could be working on contracts that have that are not prioritized, that haven't traded ever, or haven't taken out a loan, haven't pulled down a line of credit ever, and that's your priority number one. And then when you're explaining this to your executives, or your steerco, or to a group or a project team, whomever, it's very hard to explain. So leveraging risk data and other types of data sets that are relevant, I think really helps refine the contracting and the overall solution approach to prioritizing and avoiding that boil of the ocean.
I think we could prolong this conversation for another hour, but I think we've run down the clock, so I'll actually hand it back to Mike.
Great, thank you all very much. Great Q&A, great conversation here today. Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our program. I want to thank our presenters, Patrick, Charles, and Genevieve, for sharing so much of their insight and for answering questions today. If anybody asked the question that we didn't get to, someone from DocuSign or Cimplifi will get back to you as soon as possible. Again, thank you to our presenters. Thank you again to DocuSign and Cimplifi for sponsoring today's program. We really appreciate their support. And last but not least, we want to thank all of you who attended our program today. We're glad you could take some time out of your busy day to learn more about this topic. And we hope that you'll join us for future web seminars brought to you by American Banker and its partners. So on behalf of your host, your presenter, and your sponsors, thank you all for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you have a great and safe day.